Hello everyone. This is a beautiful picture from my university. We do have a college for the deaf. This is a huge mural, a huge painting that I wanted to show to all of you today. It's just of a bunch of people chatting and communicating in sign language. So that is my title today. My goal is really to spark a discussion and have any questions that you may have. There's no such thing as a bad question. I am deaf. I'm happy to answer anything that you may have about deaf people or sign language. I have my email up there if you're interested. I am here to talk one-on-one as well if you're interested. So my ultimate goal, why we're all here today, I think it is very important from a scientific lens to kind of pull back and include sign language in your research too. In terms of research questions and things that we know about sign language and spoken language, we would like to encompass all of that. First, a little bit about me. Most sign language research historically has really emphasized that ASL is not a real language, but now we want to emphasize that it is. Modality is an incredibly important word. It's kind of a hot topic, if you will. It's a little bit ironic as well that everybody wants to sign except for deaf babies. We say, oh, don't let them be exposed to that. The goal at the end maybe that we could talk about is how we would all be able to improve the lives of this kind of micro community. And you may be working with other communities, other minority communities that are also oppressed. I have used hearing aids. I do benefit from them. I do have profound hearing loss at about 90 decibels in both of my ears. I was diagnosed at 3.5 years of age. Before that, my family had no idea. We don't know why I became deaf or what happened there, but an important part of this speech is for you all to know kind of the milestones, and then we can recognize deafness a little bit earlier as a whole. I can speak, but I can't hear. So growing up at that time, it was kind of a very historical moment that we refer to as oralism. That means that speech was highly emphasized. So I went to school, but sign language was not allowed at my school. There would be light physical punishment for signing in school. I went to what we call a mainstream school that was an hour away, which means that kind of all the deaf kids were bussed over, and we were so tired by the end of that drive. So the deaf kids obviously were signing to each other on the bus all the way. We wanted that conversation with each other. We were so excited to find somebody else that knew sign language. I remember just being so excited to learn the sign for banana when I was in first grade, I think. And I was like, oh my gosh, that's the sign for banana. This is so exciting. I remember the very moment that I realized there was a such thing as a visual language, and that happened to me in first grade. So on the bus, we would all be chatting, but that was actually forbidden. But then when we got to school, our teachers would force us to wear our hearing aids, which not ideal. But they did use sound-based instruction. And I remember the teacher using a piano to try to teach us. So meaning they would press the keys on the piano and they would say 1 + 1 = 2, or however many sounds there were. So that was the basis of our teaching. So essentially what the point of that is that as a language user, I was kind of broken. I was always being told to strive for speech only. The first day that I met a deaf person who used sign language was when I was 15 years old. Often, many deaf children, they think that we are going to outgrow it or become hearing or die, literally, because we haven't seen any deaf adults as children. So I believe last year, or maybe the year before, it was said there were 150 sign languages, but now we have realized there are over 230. Most sign languages, we would say, are very young languages, younger than this country, maybe about 200, 300 years old. So we can literally observe language evolving right in front of our eyes. It is very exciting. Most languages come from a community, a group of people coming together, like at a school for the deaf, and that's where the language develops, that's where it grows. I am so lucky to be at UCSD, the University of California, San Diego, where I met Ursula, Bella Boogie. Anyway, so I was exposed to the first sign language research here. And I was just learning sign language at the time when I got to college. And I am deaf, but I didn't know sign language. I had not been exposed growing up, as I said, until I finally got to college and they were teaching that it is a real language. So we had our principles of phonology over here. You have hand shape, movement, location, and so on. We also have minimal pairs in sign language. And one thing you have to be really careful about for those is, well, let me tell you a story. So I have a friend who is a sign language researcher, very sweet, and I love him so much. However, he just signed this, which is the sign for hearing, which is fine, and then another sign that is similar but through your eyes. So it's essentially hearing through your eyes. And he kind of signed it upwards, forward on his temples, and he was saying, oh, these children do this, which he meant to say that they are receptively understanding language, but that is the sign for evil or for mischievous. So it was just a little bit incorrect. It was just a few inches different in location, but you're calling all these children mischievous. So, but anyway, there are specific locations on the body where signs are permissible and you can't move them any further than that. One really nice, interesting thing about sign language is the use of pronouns. In ASL specifically, they are very fascinating. Is anybody familiar with pronouns in ASL? We got one. I'm just curious. Okay, so for example, ASL does not have gendered pronouns. So he or she is the same sign. So pronouns essentially are just pointing. So you have a specific location, and it's really an abstract location. It doesn't matter where specifically you point, but you just kind of point, meaning he or she or it. So we don't have gendered pronouns. But also, what is so cool about that is that once I point, that specific person continues to be who I'm talking about. So I can have a range of people at different positions that I point at, and they're all referring to somebody else. So if I just say pronoun 1 loves pronoun 2, I'm obviously explaining, Bobby loves Shelley or whoever. So when I point to them again, you already know who I'm talking about, which is later, which will show up in later sentences. So if I'm just pointing, again, to that same space where Bobby is, you'll know who that is. But if I just do a couple more inches to the side, I'm talking to somebody else. I could have my object on one side and my subject on another side, but it is all based on location specifically, which is such a rich aspect of the language. You, for example, is just pointing forward towards you. But another thing that I think is just really cool is that we have singular, and of course we have plural, so we have you, and then we have you all, which is more of a sweeping gesture. So we have you and we have me, and you have you and me together is one pronoun, which would be this. So that is you and me together in one sign. And that is a pronoun just in itself. It just means you and me, the two of us. It's just so amazing. So here's a little bit more mind-blowing information. So we have a third person plural pronoun, which you could say is they. And then you have the two of them, and then the three of them, and then the four of them, and then the five of them. That's the pronouns. And then just they as well. So we have numerical properties in pronouns, which is English only really has one plural form. Well, none for you, I guess, the second person, but for they, we do, and then for we, and that's it. Okay, so we do know that sign language is a real language. We have some fabulous research supporting that. We have David Corina. We have Erin Emery as well, who does quite a lot in this space. We have a BSL, British Sign Language Research. We have evidence supporting that there is similar activations in the frontal area. We practice this, me and the interpreters, for language. And another really cool aspect that ASL has is facial expressions as linguistic features. That becomes part of our linguistics for signers.
So this to me is super cool finding in my research. If you ask native signers, hey, come and sign this, for example, the sign for hammer. So this is a sign for hammer. But also you can ask, hey, tell me, how do you use this item here? You didn't actually specifically identify it, but you may have to gesture in a sense. And so really, it's different how the brain functions. So if there are gestures that are similar to words, like for example, hammer, the motion of a hammer in hitting is almost the same as the sign that you see for hammer. So the brain does indeed recognize language different than it does for gesturing. Pantomime. So now, based on some of my research, even with babies, infants who are born, and how they track language in a space. So in 2022, it's been shown that babies have very flat affect. They don't have any affect, any facial expressions. Babies notice the difference when they're tracking with their eyes. Indeed, babies do have different eye movement of the patterns of their of eye tracking. And I will give you an example here. So this is a holistic breakdown. It's no communication. However, in the next one, there is communication notice, but there's no breakdown. And you can look at this example. So, of course, it's possible with that person, they obviously are a signer, but more like gesturing. But just in general, hand shape is not clear, if you will. I don't want to use the word weak, but it's somewhat loose. So it's very arbitrary. There's no meaning that you can actually pull out from watching those signs, am I right? So babies have a different process. For a 6-month-old, they can identify the difference. Although they have yet to see a sign, but by 11 months, it's possible, but it doesn't necessarily go away, but almost that they're tracking by 11 months, it could be without exposure to language that they are picking it up. So there's a language sensitivity there, which is not surprising. Babies, of course, need to be ready to learn language and pick that up, that acquisition of language. But in other work, it's very interesting, especially regarding finger spelling. There's been a lot of research in regard to finger spelling, and it is evolving, especially in the community. Finger spelling has become a sign unit, for example. This sign here. If I had to finger spell it, it is established from the word no good. No good. So the sign looks like this. It started off with NG, no good, but it became this. So really it's fascinating. There are proper ways to fingerspell, if you will. And then also there's improper ways of fingerspelling. The first time you fingerspell a word, like you do one letter at a time, Bosworth. My name, Bosworth. But then over time it becomes habitual that I'm spelling. I can't even spell my own name. Maybe that's not a good example. I have a better example. Charley, Charlie. Charlie, the name, for example. When I spell it this way, you can see I'm adding a little bit more motion with the spelling of the name Charlie, and it's becoming sonorous. So they're actual words. Protopathopogia, did you get that, interpreter? Did you guys get that? Someone catch that? Did someone catch it? It's one word, and really, the first time that you spell it, it's harder, but it becomes part of your vocabulary as that acquisition comes. Here's another group of people that are very fascinating, and we need to do a lot more research on it. Hearing native signers. All right, now look over here. So hearing native signers, who are hearing people born perhaps with deaf parents, and that language acquisition goes up with English at the same time. Really, most of the time, they may see sign based on their parents, but they're hearing a lot of English as well from their relatives, from the TV, driving around, just incidental. And so there's full language access in both aspects, which is bimodal. But what's really interesting, it shows that you don't have to kind of choose one over the other. You can alternately switch into both at the same time. They are blended. I do see a lot of switching as well. With my CODA kids, I see that a lot. Like 1 minute they're speaking, then the next, all of a sudden they're signing, so it's very odd. However, they also have other things, or consequences, if you will, in regard to their brain. It's less need for one language over the other, one trumping the other one, or imagine trying to speak English and Spanish at the same time. Can you imagine trying to do that at the same time? So you kind of have to downsize one or the other. So it's very interesting how the brain itself has different areas in the brain dedicated for sign language, specifically dedicated for spoken language, and both can be used at the same time. So one idea that is quite frustrating, people are often shocked in this regard with deaf people being able to read. No. Can't believe it. People are extremely shocked. You can write? Well, I'm different because, hey, I'm older, right? But a lot of deaf people typically don't use spoken English. That's their own personal decision, respectfully. But their primary language is ASL. And for those people, they don't necessarily have access to the phonological code, if you will, in print or text. They don't have any relation to print or English. So how exactly? Like, how do they, when we sound out words, that's not applicable to them. So in this study, in this case, of course, deaf people use sign language, and it's automatic lexical access to English words, which is based on color strobe, the strobe effect, which is not surprising, you can see here. I know color words are very simple, however, but more advanced reading, there's evidence here, you can see here on the right, from Liz Schroeder. There's a literature that uses, it limits the right side with 8 letters, and then there are some on the left side, there are additional letters. For deaf readers, they have this preview of further on the left side, and that's pretty interesting. And what's crazy is people interpret the results, and they say, oh, deaf people can't read. Oh, on the left, they see this information on the left. They're like, no good. But essentially, they are good readers, believe it or not. That left span is beneficial. You can see that their reading rate trumps hearing individuals based on their reading scores. So they essentially match. So what does this mean to have no modality? What exactly would that mean? Anyone? Any guesses in the audience? Earlier, I showed evidence of amodal sign, or that display of the sign. And so essentially, no modality means, I remember this. One fact is that most deaf people are born to hearing parents. And most hearing parents never have met a deaf person prior to that experience. So that may be their first experience, that baby being born, and they're unsure on what to do. So as they are growing up, of course, over that time span of being young, there's not really full access to language. And most deaf people in their world, about 95% are born with what's called language deprivation for the first time. And what's even crazier is that as time goes on, it goes all the way up until they're about a teenager. And I'm one of them in that count. It's very common. We do have some access, not full access. Like, for example, hearing aids. I've had them my whole life, but, in my dreams, at the end of the day, I don't hear anything. So it is very common to have that language deprivation. So this here is actually bad. So basically what this means, you see this blue area, it's voxel. You see these blue areas, which are regions of the brain that are correlated with AOA or EOA in the beginning stages of life, AOA. And this is at the early age of life of exposure of the language. More likely, your brain is getting access to language in the frontal lobe. That's the language area where it typically happens. So, but the more late AOA is activated or picked up, if you will, that language acquisition, it's actually essentially impacting where it won't be a positive outcome. Now, I do kind of want to shift here. So, of course, we all naturally do gesture, but you can imagine in English. She was like, huh? That gesture, that it's powerful. It's communicating something. We could change it to multimodal communication. So that research really helps us kind of appreciate that. The idea that you can communicate both in a visual mode, and of course also we all use the visual modality of language. Even spoken language has iconicity. Sign language is a little bit heavier with and what the signs look like. For example, tree, ball. However, we all use, even with spoken language and in sound, we have facial expressions all used in our language.
Even more exciting than that is that we're seeing a new language emerge for deafblind people. I'm really hoping that we can protect that and not take it away from them. It is really exciting that deaf people who are also blind, well, it started with ASL, with essentially touching a person's hand who is signing. So the deaf-blind person will put their hands on top of somebody's hands, which is not ideal. It's uncomfortable. They have to feel it really specifically. So deaf-blind people have found a way that works for them. You know, they realized that that approach was not working, so they changed to their own language. For example, instead of using a person's hand, they might touch somebody's leg, or they might touch somebody's arm, or their whole body. The whole idea of space, which is incredibly broad, I mean, we could do, you know, instead of just your mouth, just your hands, you have your entire body to communicate with. So if, you know, I am talking to somebody who is deafblind, I can literally touch their body and sign on their body to communicate what I'm trying to say. Yeah, doctors and ENTs, ear, nose, and throat doctors, SLPs, anyone kind of in that field tend to believe that it is better to teach speech to children. It's a really strange belief that if you expose a child to sign language, they will never speak. I don't know where that crazy idea came from, but that is a common held belief. That is not a joke. I'm serious. That is a real advertisement. It's an advertisement for an audiology company based outside of the US, but it looks very American. So that quote is from the 1980s, which is when I was growing up. And they didn't respect sign language when I was young. It was an embarrassing thing to do, which was incredibly common back in the 80s and 90s. It was really around the 1990s that things started to change, especially, my one professor was explaining that this is a real language. It was really like a grassroots movement. It was kind of a word of mouth almost in the development of the language, that deaf people were starting to spread their use of sign language even more. This is just the greatest irony. It is insane, but it is very well known in different sign language that with hearing babies, people are like, oh, you should teach them sign language. That is incredibly popular. We thought that sign language was fine for hearing babies, but not for deaf babies. So, what has this done? What are the consequences? I have seen in my peers, even with you all here today, I'm very grateful for you all, even hearing people who are studying sign language. I really appreciate it. But unfortunately, it's not just this is a cool thing for you to learn, and then you have to, essentially, like we're fighting a war to be included in this research. Even that title of a publication is interesting. So why? Why is this happening? It is all about autism. And that's a negative, harmful bias towards deaf people that, we all have a little bit of it, but just that thought that it is better to hear. Deaf people are deprived, they're sick. English is better. The other problem with this is that we have titles of deaf children have a problem. I hate that word. We don't have to say it's a problem. That itself is inherently biased. Excuse me. This just comes from a use of standardized tests. So the authors adapted a standardized test for a group of deaf children, which was not really applicable. So if deaf people are deprived of sign language, of course they're going to fail any test developed by hearing people. This also affects the scientific community. If you look at a normal distribution, who is in the normal distribution? It's white people. So we know based on statistics, let me just click that here. The National Center for Science, Engineering, and Statistics in 2017, they said that 98% of scientists are white. 89%. So essentially, people in a normal distribution, the people that are in that medium place, are mostly white. So of course, those who are 2 to 3 standard deviations away are often not in that category. So John Hanner, who is a deaf researcher who has published quite a lot, who unfortunately passed away recently, his research was about cryptlinguistics, which is really about how we recognize communication and language. Whatever language that you use is not broken. Whatever language you use is the one that's right for you. So, moving towards the end, I only have 1 minute left. Ooh, I'm trying not to go over time. I'm almost done. I won't quite have time to finish all that I want to say, but basically the important part to keep in mind for the future is to include the community. Design your research in a way that is inclusive. I mean, is this really what we want? You know, we're essentially reducing all deaf people to their hands without a body. I mean, is that what I look like right now? You're not seeing me, you're just seeing my hands. Or even just the thumb. But we are humans too. It's just crazy, and it's obviously that they're just not well informed on the linguistic theory of sign language. I mean, for this all conversation through one device on your thumb, that's just impossible. This says you can learn sign language in 3 months with technology. Can you really do that with a vest? That's what it says.
Perfect. Last slide.
So, okay, last slide. Don't cut me off. Stay over there. So I have a list, and I won't go through all of it for you, but I do just want to admit one thing that I do catch myself doing often is that I will say sign language, I mean American Sign Language, I mean ASL specifically, that is not universal. I don't want to, cause that misconception that ASL is all sign languages, but that is my own personal bias. And I'm not saying it's better than other sign languages either. If you go to another country, we can say our brain, does adapt to sign language, but it's only in ASL. We want to include other sign languages in that.
I want to open.
So,
Okay, I want to conclude.
okay, so I do just want to conclude. The magic word is modality. A long time ago, all of the research was focused that essentially language was only one modality. And that really was that sign language is iconic, meaning that people say, oh, that can't be a language because it has iconicity in it. So for many years, it was probably 20 or 30 years, scientists were focusing on just proving that it is a language. That was the only point of focus, but unfortunately, we have overlooked a significant place of research that we can finally take advantage of now. We can start to really understand language. So really, even though it is sad, and we had to work so hard to prove it as a language, that really has had a huge impact. I remember, young kids and teens, all of the stuff that they were fighting through, seeing their stories is beautiful. We just had this huge kind of grassroots movement, if you want to call it that, of Why I Sign. It was #WhyISign, and that was huge. It was Stacey Abrams kind of took over social media with that. And it was just so simple. She was just giving a voice to deaf people. That was it. She was just letting deaf people say, I'm proud of myself. I'm proud that I sign. And it was their parents as well, that they wanted to learn sign to talk to their deaf children, and they were told not to. Thank you so much. All right, right at 1. I don't know if we have any time for questions.
Let's take 8 minutes for questions. Jared? Yeah. Yes. Oh, I said 8. Go 8. Over a little bit.
My question is about interpreting. And so, like, a very pragmatic question. So I'm involved in some conference organizing, and this often comes up as...
No interpreter? I'm right here. Yeah, but there are deaf people in the audience?
Okay. So my question is a very pragmatic question. Yeah, so a very pragmatic question about interpreting. And so when organizing conferences, this comes up a lot because we're very keen to make sure that we have sufficient interpreting services, but it often comes at a very heavy budget and constraint that we run into in the sense that we want to provide it, but like we're being told, oh, it's very expensive, we don't know how many deaf attendees will come, we don't know until the conference, right, if people have registered or not. Often we can know that people will be presenting, and then that can help us to gauge the interpreting needs. But even if we're in a different country, for example, how to select the appropriate language, right? So we're having a conference in Australia. Should it be in Auslan, American Sign Language, International Sign? So I guess just generally, what are your thoughts on how conferences, how we should be organizing and how to prioritize these different constraints and needs?
Well, typically what is happening is that kind of all signers just kind of gravitate together. Maybe they go to one or two areas in a conference, but if there's a huge conference and there's only one deaf person, honestly, they would probably leave. That's just kind of the consequence of not being inclusive. It really just takes a lot of planning and budgeting, especially kind of navigating that with your university.
Thank you for the interesting talk. I've been really interested in bilingualism both in single modality as well as in bimodality. But the hard part is actually doing research with bimodal bilinguals that is better representative of codas than, say, sign language interpreters. It's often, I think, easier to recruit sign language interpreters. So do you have general advice or feedback in thinking through how we can do better participant recruitment and also be more considerate of participant populations when we want to work with deaf or signing populations, even if they're not deaf?
Well, if you're doing research with hearing people can sign too. Many hearing people are codas. They're a part of that group. If you decide that you want to test deaf people, you do need to include deaf feedback in your research. So really the best thing to do, which is what normal, essentially orthographically, which is just kind of, naturally where they will be. If deaf students are interested, they will be involved. And that will really help with increasing the number of deaf scientists.
Thank you.
Thanks, that was a really interesting talk. Something you mentioned that I've always wondered about is when people are simultaneously signing and speaking, so like ASL and English at the same time. I don't know much about ASL since it's coming from a very ignorant place, but I'm wondering, I imagine there are cases where, like, for instance, word order is different or the grammars don't align. And you said something to the effect of one gets sacrificed. I'm wondering what happens in those cases. Like, are you actually simultaneously producing two languages, or are you sort of pseudo-producing one and really producing the other, or what's going on?
I think it's a little bit more like gesturing. Are you talking about hearing codas?
Or, sorry, any case where someone is speaking and signing at the same time, so it could be a hearing person or non.
Right. So if you are, talking, sign language isn't just going to kind of come up. But if you're talking about SIMCOM, simultaneous communication, that is not going to be ASL. It is going to be English word order. It kind of is similar to broken English. So that's not really a language. It is just kind of another way to communicate, I guess. But yes, different sign languages do have their own grammar that doesn't necessarily line up with their spoken language.
Interesting. Thank you.